Welcome to Wreck Diving in South Florida. I am Jessica Anderson. I am a sailing and diving specialist for Navionics. We are joined by Jim Matthie, who is an author, a diving author, a local diver, and an expert in diving and wreck diving and spearing or catching bugs and spearing fish, all kinds of stuff. So we'll be talking to him today about wreck diving in South Florida. Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to Navionics for hosting this webinar. And just a little bit about me. I've been diving and scuba and free diving in South Florida for over a decade and in the Bahamas. And we spearfish and go lobstering and wreck dive, drift dive, all the different normal kinds of diving here in South Florida. And Jim, also called Chiefy, is an author of Catching the Bug. Many of you have seen his book in almost every dive shop around, if not every single dive shop. And he also is author of Catching the Spirit, a spearfishing book. He's a dive writer and author and a go-to resource for South Florida underwater hunting and diving. What we're going to talk about today are, one, I'm going to give Chiefy a little bit of time to just give us some background on himself. And then we're going to talk about what makes South Florida wreck diving special. We're going to talk about specific wreck dives in South Florida, some of Chiefy's favorites. And he's going to give us some expert tips on diving in South Florida. If you have any questions, you can use the little icon that says Q&A, and that will send us questions. And we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. The webinar should last about 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And if you have any questions that we don't get to, I will try to answer any questions via email afterward. So Chiefy, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself and then tell us why diving in South Florida, wreck diving in South Florida is so great?
Okay, that's a good lead in. I actually learned to dive in the Bahamas, of all places. And we didn't call it free diving back then. We called it skin diving. And then, I started tank diving and scuba diving here, got certified, and I've been probably diving this area for a good 30 years. Kind of from Fort Lauderdale, Port Everglades north to about Boynton. I have dove a little bit on up to Jupiter, and then also dove a lot in the Bahamas, as well as Key West. Actually, I've never really done a lot in between, sort of like Key Largo and all that. I haven't been there, but mainly Key West, all the way down to the Dry Tortugas. That's an annual trip that we do. But what kind of makes, I think, South Florida really special is you can pretty much do it all here. I mean, we have such, first of all, we have a lot of wrecks, a lot to choose from, and but they're very close. You don't really have to travel very far to get to any wreck. And and some of them are fairly deep for the technical divers, and some of them are very shallow and even historic, like the Copenhagen in Lauderdale by the Sea, that you can actually snorkel out to. So to be able to do that in one area, I think is very unique, very, very special. But primarily, I'm an underwater hunter. That's kind of what I like to do. And, having written Catching the Bug, we're just coming and finishing up on bug season right now. Tomorrow will be our last day to put those lobster in the freezer. But we don't really see a lot of bugs on wrecks. That's typically not where you see them. However, of course, we did the Ghost Tug, which is just north of Boca Raton off of Highland Beach, about 2 weeks ago, and lo and behold, here's 6 bugs on the Ghost Tug, in 30 feet of water, out in the middle of the sand. Don't ask me what the heck they were doing. Obviously lost. And the good news is, 3 of them was too small, but 3 of them were keepers. So that was actually well worth it. Now, a lot of times, though, we jump in on the Ghost Tug for spearfishing. It's a great free diving. We see a lot of guys that are free diving it for us, we have a tendency, because it's out in the middle of nowhere. When I say that, there's sand everywhere. We'll see cobia on there, jacks. Heck, the last nice fish that we got there was a grouper. Lo and behold, in the inside of that ghost tug. So, and again, that's catching the spirit. I wrote that too, and that's kind of what I really love to do. And that's really, from a underwater hunting standpoint, what's the advantage of wrecks for me.
So I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
We've been diving on quite a few wrecks in the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and as well as wrecks here. And I noticed that it seems to be that there are more bugs on the wrecks in the Bahamas versus here. Like you said, they're usually not on the wrecks here.
Right.
Do you think that it could possibly be because there's so many divers in such a concentrated location here? And
I think so. I don't think they stand much of a chance when and if they do make it to a wreck. And people know about them and they dive them very frequently. I don't think they really last very long. So, to see 6 on the ghost tug 2 weeks ago was very unique. We just don't see them, and they are there occasionally, I'm sure, but for the most part, these wrecks get a lot of diving. There's a lot of divers on these wrecks, and very popular. And some of them, I mean, it's just a constant flow of divers from the commercial guys and even private guys. So unlike in the Bahamas, I think the Bahamas, well, first of all, they may not be artificial reefs. So the wrecks that you find in the Bahamas are placed there, whether intentionally or accidentally, but maybe they're not artificial reefs. Where the wrecks that we have here are artificial reefs. And by the way, that's a good question that some people ask me, can I harvest lobster from an artificial reef? And the answer is, if it's permitted, if it was placed down there intentionally for a wreck, yes, you're allowed to harvest because if it has a permit for it. But if it was placed there, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's come up occasionally. Like, hey, I've seen a lobster or two on a wreck. Can I take it? Because you're really in the state of Florida, 3 miles off. You're not supposed to take anything on an artificial reef. But if it has a permit, yes, you're able to take lobster.
Huh. Okay, great. That's good to know.
Yep.
So one of the wrecks that people have been interested in and that you are also experienced with is the Nuala Express United Caribbean Sea
Yep.
Emperor. And can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I mean, I used to dive the Sea Emperor all the time. It was the upside down barge. Essentially, it's got a pile of culvert, concrete sewer pipes off to the east side, and it's upside down, but you can penetrate it fairly easy. And the depth is 65, 70 feet. So it's a very easy dive. Again, if you are penetrating wrecks, I'd recommend that you take an additional class for wreck diving, because there are, even though this one was made for divers to go inside and get out of, it's got openings all the way through. There is opportunities or possibility, I guess, of getting caught in there. So you want to be able to at least have some certification for wreck diving. But I used to dive that all the time, and I used to do a lot of spearfishing on there. However, there was a practice back probably 20 years ago where they used to feed the fish, feed the Goliath Grouper and the sharks and the moray eels and and so, I mean, it was a great wreck, and it's still a great wreck to bring visitors, but it's prohibited now to feed wildlife. You know, it's sort of like feeding the bears. So that's a good thing in state waters. But it's a frequent wreck that guys go to, and then they've added the United Caribbean wreck, and then they've put a rock pile trail between the two wrecks. So the beauty of it is you can pretty much do both of those wrecks on one tank. I'm saving the Nuala or Nola for last, but that was actually the first wreck that was put down. That's on the reef, actually. And in Hurricane Andrew in 1992, it was actually ripped in half. So there's not the wheelhouse is sort of tipped over, and it's a kind of a big old pile of mess. But it's got a lot of fish. All three wrecks, including this rock pile, holds a lot of fish. And you'll see everything from Goliath Grouper to sharks, and they're very good. And on a good day with good current and pretty good navigational skills, I've done all three wrecks on one tank. So that's a lot of fun for me, and including part of the reef. So that's pretty neat.
I think you made a couple of really good points in that. One is that I think some people that have not been diving in South Florida or not had the opportunity to dive these wrecks, that you can do multiple wrecks within one dive. This is a really unique opportunity because it's not only can you do multiple wrecks in one dive, but you can do it easily because of that. I think that rock pile makes it especially easy to navigate between the wrecks. So if you haven't been to South Florida and gotten to experience this group of wrecks, which you can do in multiple or one dive, I would highly suggest that you try this out because it's definitely a unique experience.
Right, and these three wrecks were artificial wrecks. They were placed there intentionally, including the rock pile. Okay, so they weren't there, 40 years ago. So, and the beauty of it is it lies between the Boca Raton Inlet and the Hillsborough Inlet. So we do have a fair amount of dive operations that will dive it. So it does get a lot of traffic. So if I see a charter on there, a dive charter, I don't normally dive this, or, they'll maybe do the Sea Emperor, they'll tie off to it. They'll do, they'll put their 20 divers in or whatever. And I'll go over maybe to the Nuala or Nola, depending on if it's tomato or tomato. But the beauty that I like with the Nuala is it's on the wreck. It's on the reef, so that you can literally just come off of that and then just continue your dive in whichever direction the current's going. And you can either go in close. These are all in 65 feet of water. So an open water diver can do it. However, again, because it's a wreck, if you decide to go inside, I wouldn't really make it a point to have a wreck diving certification.
Yeah, and that was the other point I was gonna make that you had, or reiterate that you had made. I think that it is really important to have a little extra training for these wreck dives, because I know there are a lot of people that go into the wrecks and they think, oh, it's just another dive, but there is a lot of opportunity for possible things that happen. And there are a lot of things. You can get injured on a wreck more easily, and you can get your equipment damaged. So I think it is really important to have that extra training.
Yeah, and I've seen free divers do these too, because the tops of these are about 50 feet. So it is very easy to get to. And you're talking less than a mile offshore. This is really what we call the third reef that they're real close to. And again, it's really close and accessible to all the inlets. You're not going to be able to swim out to them, unless you had, say, maybe a kayak or something along that lines. You have to be really adventurous for that. But there are three nice wrecks. There's a lot to them, and with the reef nearby, that's what I like. I like to be able to do all at the same time. I don't anchor dive. A lot of commercial guys will do that. They'll anchor to the wreck, and then they'll have all their divers go down. I like to hit a wreck, hit maybe another wreck, maybe three wrecks, and then continue on to the reef. So that's kind of the way I like to operate.
Yeah, that's what we always like to do with these wrecks. These wrecks are perfect for drift diving.
Yep.
The next one on the list is the Ancient Mariner.
Oh, it's a beauty. Although, you know, it had a bad history. This Ancient Mariner was actually a dining restaurant on the, I want to say on the New River one time down in Fort Lauderdale. And some folks got, you know, they got sick. And
Hepatitis.
yeah, and then, so they ended up going into bankruptcy, and then somebody acquired it, and then they sunk it. This was, again, an artificial reef that Broward County does a great job. Greater Fort Lauderdale, Broward County does a great job of sinking these wrecks. There's probably 40 of them off of our coast. And this one lies actually just south of Deerfield Beach. It's right off of Hillsborough Beach, but again, between the two inlets, the Boca Raton Inlet and the Hillsborough Inlet, again on the western edge of the third reef. Same setup that what you had with the three wrecks that we just talked about, you know, the Nuala and the Sea Empress and the United Caribbean. This one, it's in pretty good shape, this Ancient Mariner. It's a nice wreck. They've made it accessible for divers if you want to go inside. It's in a kind of an east-west configuration. And if you continue going east, you get to what's called Berry Patch. It's a little tugboat, and there's a couple of little piles of something or other. But again, it's a nice wreck. And if you can, I love it with a south drift, because if you just stay a little bit on the western edge of the reef, as you continue going south, there's a barge that's not even marked here that was sunk. And again, a really nice one. And then if you keep going south, hit a little bit of east, you then hit the reef. And the reef there is really good. It's got a nice double wall, like an inside and outside wall. So again, you can drift dive this and catch all this really good stuff.
Awesome. I think it's really interesting, some of the stories that are behind these wrecks.
Yeah. and it's kind of cool. I mean, just diving a wreck, if you've never done one, it's just sort of like when you took your first breath in the pool, you know, on the regulator off your scuba tank, and you go, hey, I'm not supposed to do this, you know, breathe underwater. And the same thing, that ship is not supposed to be underwater, you know, what's the deal with that? So it's kind of eerie looking. I've come upon wrecks, I kind of know where I am, and I'm drifting, and all of a sudden there's the wreck. Wow, okay, it's pretty eerie, pretty cool looking type of thing. And you never know it's down there.
Especially when the visibility is a little bit lower, and it just is a shadow that slowly appears. I think I get that extra sense of creepiness, but it's a really, really cool experience. So if you haven't been wreck diving, those of you that are listening or will be listening to the recording, it is really something you have to try, especially in Florida, for the reasons that Chiefy's gone over. I want to clarify one thing too, for those of you that aren't familiar with South Florida, and especially with the Fort Lauderdale area, we have 3 reef lines. And when Chiefy's talking about the third reef, what he's meaning is the outermost reef line, the one that's furthest away from the shore. Right, Chiefy?
Yeah, you know, we have what's called a 3 reef line here. We're very fortunate. It starts actually down to the Dry Tortugas, which is technically in the Gulf of Mexico. It's 70 miles west of Key West. So that's where this 3 reef system starts, and it continues parallel, sort of curving northward up and goes all the way to Martin County. So it's over 400 miles of reef system. And we pretty much right here, fortunately for us, it's very close. It comes really close to our coast right here. And the 3 reefs, the first one's like 15 feet, 20 feet of water. Then the second one is sort of 40 to 60. Then there's a sort of a trench of sand, a good 1,000 feet wide. And that's where a lot of these wrecks are. in about 65 feet. And then the third reef, which is a spectacular reef. You've got a lot of west-facing walls, a lot of structure there, and that's the third reef, and that then will drift out into about 100 feet. You'll find another kind of like edge, and then it's patchy after that. So pretty good. And the other beauty of being here, Jessica, and that is the Gulf Stream. Summer currents, the warm currents of the Gulf Stream come really close to here. So that combination of, where we are, how close we are, and how dramatic the drop off here is. I mean, you go a mile offshore, you're in 100 feet of water. So it's very, very close. Everything's really close.
Yeah, really, really nice for us and very convenient for diving. I know when we go diving on the west coast of Florida, you can go for 30 miles or more, and here you can go a mile, and it's just super convenient, which is another reason that South Florida is so nice for not just wreck diving, but any kind of diving, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the West Coast diving there's a lot of fish there. That's what I understand, and there are wrecks, artificial and intentional, whatever. And the fish kind of come up to greet you, whereas here there's a lot of pressure. So you have to be a little bit more of a hunter, especially if you're diving off a scuba. You're making all this noise, so those fish hear you. So you've got to kind of be really strategic, go a little higher, and then kind of work, and then find them, and then head down and shoot them if you can.
Right. So our next wreck to talk about is the Miracle of Life, and I think this one's of special interest.
Yeah, I love this wreck. I actually helped with this as far as putting it down, not physically sinking it, but just was involved with this. This was actually a confiscated drug vessel from the federal government, and it's 164 feet long, and the federal government gave it to the city of Deerfield Beach, as it's right directly off the Deerfield Beach pier in 142 feet of water to the bottom. So this is past the third reef. It's a little deep. The top of the structure is about 100, 110. So you really have to kind of pay attention to this one. If you're going to dive nitrox, you got to make sure your percentages are not too high. And but what's cool about this, besides the fact that it is open for divers and everything else, is there's a 12-foot or 14-foot angel on it, and just a cool wreck. Our buddy Dan Fasano had leukemia, and great guy, and he ended up getting a bone marrow transplant, and he was on the way up, everything was going well, and then he had a setback. And we were able to sink this June 6th, 2009, and he ended up dying 2 days later after we sunk it. But I was really glad. He knew we sunk it. He went in, he had the problems again with the leukemia, and it got him. But man, it was such a great dive for us to be able to be part of this experience. And he named it Miracle of Life, because it gives new life to the reefs. And that's really the whole point of having these wrecks, is they take the pressure off of the natural reefs. By having artificial reefs down there, and for us divers, and have more fish on it, it helps. It helps the whole environment. So I'm really a fan of artificial reefs.
What an amazing way to commemorate a life. I mean,
yeah, he's a great guy, full of energy. He actually started diving because he wanted to overcome his fear, his fears, and because he had leukemia for a little while. And we really thought he was on the upswing and very energetic. And he ended up passing away. But what a great testament to him. Every time I dive this wreck, I think of him, and I say a special prayer, when I see the angel. It's really pretty. Yeah,
Definitely. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. That's
good
an
one.
amazing
So
story.
good one. Yep.
So the next wreck is the Hydro Atlantic.
Ah,
Feeling
okay.
the story won't be quite as touching as the last one, but
This is a natural wreck, meaning it was not intentionally sunk there. This was an accident. And it's right off of the Boca Inlet. This one's a little deeper too. This lays in 172 feet of water. So it's considered a technical dive, which again, what a great opportunity for here to be able to, like I said, be able to snorkel off and see wrecks, off the beach and the beautiful beaches that we have. And then on top of that, to turn around and have technical diving available a mile off the Boca Inlet. So just you've got your mix of everything here. But a lot of technical divers do this wreck. And this was a cable vessel that was in a storm. And again, like I said, sank accidentally. And whoops, the Hydro Atlantic. But it's a big one. It's a 320-foot freighter, and it's a real shipwreck. There's no doubt about this. And there's a lot of it's not been like an artificial wreck. A lot of times they'll open it up for divers, so you have to be really, really careful with this one. There's a lot of cables hanging around, a lot of stuff to see, a lot of cranes. It's pretty cool wreck. A lot of fish on this wreck. A lot of fish.
do you think that part of the reason that there's so many fish on this wreck is that it's deeper and it gets hit less? Is there less traffic on this wreck?
I think just because of the currents, this is known to have pretty strong currents, and I think big fish like currents, but also probably because it doesn't get hit a lot either. Regular fishermen are fishing these wrecks too, so they know where they are. Everyone kind of knows these. That has the lats and the longs. They find them, and they come up on their GPS. So they're not on their sounder. So yeah, this is not difficult to find, and a lot of guys fish these. But because I think its placement, it's a little deeper, and because there's a fair amount of current out here, I think you do get a lot of nutrients come by, and you see bigger fish out here.
Something to note too, I didn't mention this before, is that the Navionics charts if you have the latest edition of the app and the charts, then they have added some of the wrecks and reefs into the charts.
Very cool.
So not only can you mark the spots yourself, but some of them, if you zoom in, you'll be able to see some of these on your chart. So
very cool. Very cool.
Maybe more people will hit them because of that, but
well, I mean, we just have a very popular boating population here, whether it's fishing, diving, or just pleasure boating. So hey, but you want to have every tool in your toolbox for doing what you need to do. So okay with that.
Right.
The caster. Man, oh man, I don't know how the Goliath Grouper got the email, but they all go there, to spawn.
Oh my goodness. It's amazing the number of Goliath Grouper you see on the caster.
Yeah, now the word of caution here, I would not spear fish on this wreck.
We have a great story, great being a relative word, about spearing a fish on this wreck and a Goliath Grouper getting the fish and taking the spear and everything. And my husband was holding on to that gun and he would not let go, and he almost got pulled into that wreck. I mean,
yeah.
I would not suggest shooting fish here either.
Yeah, it's the Goliath Grouper, even though they look big, and you don't think that they're much of a, quote, predator, sort of like a shark, but holy smokes, they come in like Volkswagens.
They do.
And they will knock you over and drag you for wherever they can take you. So I have a funny story of a Goliath Grouper taking a fish off my buddy on the Sea Empress. Came up from the middle of the wreck and grabbed the fish and almost pulled him into the wreck. Similar type of thing. Lucky for my buddy, who I was actually next to. I was laughing my ass off, to tell you the truth, because it was kind of funny watching him being pulled into the wreck. But good for him was he had a plastic swivel on his fish ring. We did lose the fish ring. We lost the fish. But yeah, this guy was probably a good 500 pounds. So this wreck here, because I mean, their Goliath Grouper are everywhere on this thing. I just wouldn't even go near this place on with a spear gun at all.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, and I don't want to scare anybody away from it that has never seen a Goliath grouper is not familiar with diving with them. If you're not spearfishing, they're not aggressive. You don't approach them. You can just swim by them and don't try to interact with them. But they're not aggressive as long as you leave them alone. And
Yep.
but it's definitely really, really, really interesting seeing this many of them. I mean, I remember when we first started diving this wreck, there were a few here and there, just one or two, maybe 3 or 4. And now, I mean, I haven't counted them, but there must be 30, 40, 50, maybe more.
Yeah, I mean, on a normal day, I think they're easily plus 20, plus 30. That's on a normal, hey, let's go diving, the caster. But when they're spawning, I've heard accounts of over 100 Goliath Grouper, and they're huge. Some of them are small. It is a cool sight to see. I got to agree with you there. If you're not spearfishing, there's really nothing to be fearful of them because they're really a cool creature. They'll give you they'll kind of do their, what do you call it, their gills and make some noise if they're really kind of upset. So be on the lookout for that. But they are such a cool creature. To be able to see this many of them in one location is really ideal. And it's right off of Del Rey. The bottom is 110. So, you got to watch your depth. And it's a little distance away from the reef, if I remember right. A lot of guys will just do this wreck, anchor it pretty much, and do the wreck and then come back. I'll do this on a charter, kind of fun. But I have done it where I've dropped in some guys and then they swam to the west, and then you catch a reef. There's about a 100-foot reef right there. And there's actually a couple more wrecks that are on the inside as well. I think if you have a north current, I think it's a Budweiser and a couple others that are pretty cool as well.
Yeah, there are quite a few things that are pretty close by there. So
Yep.
Some good diving in there.
Oh yeah.
So from your years of diving and your years of experience, what tips can you give us for, say, dropping on these wrecks when they're currents? Because those of you that haven't been diving in South Florida may not be familiar with the currents here, but we can have some pretty swift currents, and hitting a wreck in current, especially when you're not used to wreck diving or you're not used to drift diving, can be a challenge. What tips can you give us for hitting the wreck?
Yeah, good one on that. First of all, guessing the current is always a challenge, whether it's north or south. That's predominantly, we typically have a north current here in South Florida, but occasionally we will have a south current. I love south currents because typically we have some better visibility with south currents. And some of them get pretty strong in both directions. Every once in a while, you'll get some strange stuff that'll push you east or push you west, those kind of things. It's just like diving. Anything. The issue that you have with a wreck, because it's stationary, you want to be able to jump on it and stay on it if you can. So you can use the wreck to your advantage sometimes, either going inside the wreck or to the side of the wreck that, the current's not on. So kind of using it to, kind of take a break from the current. So that's a good thing to do. But a lot of charters, the way they do wrecks is they'll send the dive master down and he'll anchor to the wreck. And he can usually tell you whether the wreck is, if the current is really strong or not. And that way, you can kind of determine. I know me personally, I'll do a wreck when I'm looking forward to like a almost no current. When we've maybe done a reef and I'm cursing because I have to actually kick, on the drift. I'm like, I spent the last hour kicking because there's no current. That's the day that I want to jump in on a wreck because I can spend some time down there,
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. There have been days that we've dive a wreck and you're doing everything you can to kicking just as hard as you can to stay on that wreck and not come off. And the best thing you can do is get on the opposite, on the like the down current side,
Right.
to protect yourself from the current, like you said, just to give yourself a break. And also,
Yeah.
for those of you that haven't been diving on a wreck in pretty high currents before, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking as you're going down because you're in such strong currents. It feels like there's no way you're going to be able to stay on the wreck once you get down there. But fear not, once you get down there, it does get a little bit easier. And like Jim said, you can always kind of hide on the other side, the down current side behind the wreck, so that you have a break. So it does get easier once you get down there.
Yeah, you use your wreck to the advantage, if you are anchor diving. Again, on my boat, we're just a couple of guys going out. We're always going to drift dive. I'll never anchor dive. And so for me, what I always like is I'm going to hit that wreck. I'm going to do the wreck. And then I don't care which way the current's going. I'm going to go with the current, that kind of thing. But on a lot of the charter boats, they're going to anchor to it. And you can anchor to it. It's not a problem if you have a private boat. Just know that you're going to have to, compensate then for the currents if you have a strong current.
Yeah. So what can you, I know that, and I mentioned, I started to talk about earlier that the safety on wrecks is really important. And there are a lot more opportunity for injuring yourself than, say, diving on a reef. What would you tell us about staying safe on a wreck?
We stressed on it. If you penetrate, or if you go inside the wreck, you want to really take a class. They're going to go over a lot of the hazards with you. The key thing is entanglement. Getting caught on something. The key there is don't panic. As long as that regulator's in your mouth and you're A-okay, then just figure out what the problem is. Hopefully your buddy can help you if you get tangled up. I would say keep your own personal gear as streamlined as possible. You don't want things hanging or dangling that will cause you to get caught on the wreck. So streamline yourself personally, but that's even when you're diving. You want to really make sure you have minimal type of drag on anything. Obviously, free diving, you want to be really careful. I see a lot of these guys, will free dive and they'll go inside a wreck. You got to be careful, obviously. And, if you're spearfishing, for sure, you want to be careful. That's the other thing. If you are spearfishing, a lot of times the fish will go into the wreck and wrap itself around whatever's inside the wreck. So it always helps, particularly if you're going to shoot a big fish. We're not ashamed to have our buddy put another shaft in them to help, so that way you take care of that fish. So let's not have that thing running all over the place and dragging you all over the place. Let's put that fish down as quickly as you can, and then control that fish as quickly as you can too. Because sharks do show up at these wrecks occasionally too. They're a pretty good sight for sharks. So good and bad, just be aware of them, that they're there.
I think that it's, as you were saying, entanglement is usually a bigger possibility on a wreck. And so I've found especially that having a knife is always important for a scuba diver, I think, but having it on a wreck is super important. Also checking your air regularly. I am guilty of running out of air on a wreck twice.
Wow.
One of them was because my gauge was very wrong.
Okay.
And I thought it was right. The other was me not paying attention, and there is never an excuse for that. So don't let that happen. And on a wreck especially, people get sidetracked, they're after fish, they're not paying attention, your buddy isn't looking, and you can end up in trouble really fast. So
right.
What about...
I agree with you there. Any underwater hunting, whether it's going for lobster or you're spearfishing, you get caught up in what you're doing and you're forgetting about your gauges a lot of times and things like that. So I agree. And good point on the knife. I don't carry one knife, I carry two.
That's
You know,
even better.
yeah, typically one is for dispatching the fish, but the other one is really just to cut. Actually, my buddy just gave me a like a fishing line kind of cutter. It's a pretty cool little device. Dr. Jack gave it to me, so it's really kind of cool to have it. So we had that available because even fishing line, you get caught on fishing line. It's particularly some of this fishing line, it can hurt you. It can be bad.
Yeah, definitely a good point. And that fishing line cutter is a great idea.
Yep.
How about for navigating between wrecks? There are quite a few opportunities in South Florida for diving multiple wrecks in one dive. What tips can you give us for navigating between wrecks?
You know, lucky for us, a lot of them already have stuff between them. You know, whether it's you know, different clubs or whatever have put maybe some pipes, you know, there, some rebar pipes that will navigate you between the wrecks. I know that's the way it is on the one off of Hillsborough Beach. What the heck one was? Oh, yeah, the Ancient Mariner. Between that and the berry patch, there's actually some stakes in the ground, so you can kind of navigate between them. That's cool. And the one, you know, the Sea Empress and the United Caribbean, they put a pile of rocks between them. So that's really, really convenient. And aren't they nice about that?
Yeah.
But a lot of times, you know, if you're on whether you're on a private boat or not, if you can kind of figure out where you are, you know, in the current, you want to drift into the, you know, so if you got a north current, you want to take the south wreck and continue going north. Make it as easy as possible for you. Even if you have a little bit of current, use it to your advantage.
I think that's a great point. I think maybe that's something that some people end up learning the hard way because they are not familiar with wreck diving or especially with drift diving. They're not on the West Coast. I know they don't have to think about that nearly as much as we do because they can just swim between wrecks. But here, it's definitely want to start with the up current wreck and drift down to the next one. Great point.
Yep, good point.
I think we covered a lot of information on hunting on wrecks. Are there any additional tips that you have to give us about hunting on wrecks?
Bigger fish. That's all we're going to have. I mean, the big fish like wrecks, and you know, you want to be prepared for that. You know, they're there. That'll be April 1st. You know, which will be no more bug season. I'll put away all the snares and the lobster bag and all that stuff, and then we'll simply do spearfishing. So we'll be higher off the wreck, we'll be higher off the reef, we'll be simply spearfishing. So these are actually good times. You know, this time of year, we have to wait till May 1st in the state of Florida for grouper season. So we have a whole month here, but you know, the cobia are around, big hogfish, and big snapper. So yeah, it's fun times.
Yeah, I agree. Looking forward to getting out there this weekend. So for those of you that are looking for more information or would like to read some of Chiefy's books, you can see the books right here, and he's got a website, and you can find these books in all of your local dive shops in South Florida. And Chiefy, is there anywhere else that they can find them?
Amazon.com. Yeah, we're up on Amazon.com. Catching the Bug. Right now, I'm on a second edition. I've actually sold out of the first edition. You may still see a few out there, so grab it. It's a classic, okay? But we're actually working on the second edition as we speak, editing, doing some redesign work a little bit. It'll be actually some more Chiefy stories, and we're adding a few more sections. So it should be fun and entertaining. I write, the way I write is the way I talk. I tell stories, and then they actually mean something. So that's the good part about the books. You learn a lot from them. They're really good.
These are great books. It's not like instructions, 1, 2, 3, this is how you have to do things, and boring. These are very engaging and entertaining. So
good times. Yeah, but the spearfishing book is out there. And again, it's available on Amazon.com as well for you guys. All right.
Okay, and again, I'd like to thank Navionics for hosting this webinar, and I'm going to check out to see what questions you guys have. If you have any questions, again, you can click the Q&A icon, and it'll send us the questions. If you don't have time to write it out now, or you're having trouble typing it in, I've had some people say that they've had trouble typing it into the Q&A, then you're welcome to reply to the email as well that you'll receive after this webinar. The webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to view it again if you'd like on the Navionics YouTube site. You'll also be able to view it on the Navionics site under webinars, and Chiefy will have it up on his site as well. And you'll also receive an email after this webinar with a link to the webinar section of the Navionics page so that you can easily access it. So we have one question about diving in the Keys versus diving in South Florida. Are there any wrecks in the Keys that are laid out? I think what they mean is, are they laid out where you can do multiple wrecks like you can in South Florida?
I don't know that. Their big claim to fame in the Keys are they've got big wrecks down there. They've got one off of Key Largo, and they've got one down there in Key West. And they're big wrecks, and they're very popular. A lot of guys will just jump in on that. But as far as how they have them here, I honestly don't know. I've not done much wreck diving in the Keys. Yeah, there are some. I mean, I've done some just the reef diving in the Keys, and I can tell you the reefs are just beautiful and definitely worth the trip. And everybody that I know that's done the wreck diving in the Keys say that it's amazing. And like Chiefy said, they're really big wrecks. I haven't had anybody tell me any stories specifically of having multiple wrecks within one dive. I think South Florida is definitely the place to go for that, because we do have multiple opportunities for that. Yeah, and we actually consider the Keys part of South Florida. Yeah. I'm just giving them a hard time. You know, they succeeded from the Union a while back ago, but I think they're back. Well, if there are any other questions, then you guys can email me about these questions. And thank you so much for joining, and thanks again to Navionics, and thank you so much, Chiefy, for answering all of our questions about wreck diving in South Florida. All right, Jessica. Thanks a lot.